I think I just have to come to the conclusion that I am a broken record. I seem to do nothing but repeat myself again and again and again. And guess what? Again. So, today on the bench, a President Lincoln 2 Plus. The customer sent in 2 radios. This one belonged to a friend of his that bought it from a shop that had it's had the Dustin modification done to it. Don't ask me, that's what it is, the Dustin mod, I guess. I guess that's who did it. Dustin, I would have to assume. But anyhow, the original person that bought this, like I say, is a friend of his. Bought it with that modification, I guess didn't work right or whatever, and it's been back twice to get worked on, and it's still not right. So he bought it on. Now the modification apparently cost, I think it was $100, he said. He bought it off of the guy for less than the price of, radios cost new. So, the guy has lost, considerable amount of money. He got it and he said, well, send it to me, see if I can get it, working. But apparently he hooked this up to his amplifier, and guess what? He smoked his amp. So, yeah. Now, it's not a good sign when you take all of the screws off of the covers and you can't get the cover off. I took the screws off, and this is the top cover because the radio's upside down, and I'm on the back of it, got my fingernails up underneath of there, and I just can't get. I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? I'm prying, and it finally, blink, it pops loose. And for starters, what is that? Yeah, for being a new radio, why is there a smoke spot on the cover? Yeah, that doesn't bode well. And then you look at the circuit board. Oh my God. And no, that's not smoke damage. Well, there may be some under there somewhere. That is a huge glob of black goop. Yeah. I saw that, and yeah, whatever was going through your mind, probably just multiply that by 10. That's what was going through my mind. What in the hell is this? Just... I struggle for words. And yeah, you can see, okay, we've got the trace that comes from, if I zoom out a little bit, comes from the AM regulator. Okay, it's supposed to come across here, and yeah, it's, I don't know if I can get the camera to focus or not, but that trace has been cut under here. There's a wire bodged on here, and then it goes to a bunch of parts, yeah, whatever is underneath all this junk that's on here. Looks like probably 1 or 2 resistors, I'm guessing, inside each blob there. It kind of looks like it. And that's what was stuck. That's why I couldn't get the cover off, because this stuff apparently kind of softened up again and was stuck to the cover. But yeah, I mean, really? I mean... And what the hell is up with that? Why is there a gigantic glob of screw? Gigantic blob of screw. Well, yeah, it is. Blob of solder over that screw. What, was it going to launch itself out of the radio? I mean, what? I don't get it. The screw should look like that. A screw. Again, I have no idea what goes through people's minds. But it gets better. We take off the bottom cover. Now the holy, yeah, just pick a word. What in God's name did somebody do to this poor defenseless radio? Another one. For starters, do we really need a 10,000 microfarad cap in this thing? They glued it in. That's what all this junk is here. Look how well that's bonded to the side of the radio. Yeah, it's not. What good did that glue do? If it doesn't even stick to aluminum, I don't know. Big ferrite core there with a bunch of wire wrapped around it. All kinds of work back here, and especially down here. So... for starters, again, I told this customer this radio it works. I mean, well, they say it works well. It transmits and it receives. Transmit is horrible, and I'll show that here in a minute. But do we really need to put all of this black crap all over the place? Now, this is an electronic device. Eventually, every single part in this radio will fail. It's no different than people. I'm going to die someday. Every single part in this radio at some point in the future, be it tomorrow, next year, 10, 50, 100, 200 years from now, or more, every part's going to fail eventually. How in the heck are you supposed to get to any of the parts underneath all of that goop to replace them when they do go bad? Better yet, you see these little things down here? There and there and there. There's another one over there, there's a couple over here. These are trimmer resistors, okay? They're used when you're doing a proper alignment on the radio. There's one right there. How are you supposed to even get to that one? You can't. They added one. That is a through-hole trimmer resistor that was not originally in this radio. I have no idea what other parts are underneath of this podge-bodgery of goop, but yeah, there's another trimmer resistor, but it's completely sealed in the black goop, so you can't even adjust it. Really? Oh, it gets better. We have a red wire attached straight to the power jack on the back of the radio. We follow that red wire over. It comes to this ferrite choke, or ferrite core. Okay, so they're using this as a choke. You can see that's glued down to, actually this is sticking. A lot better adhesive action than we had with this capacitor over here that just popped off. But we look down in here, and once again, what in the... Yeah, so the red wire comes down. Now this ferrite bead is supposed to be on here. This little choke right here, that's normal. But it normally does not have a red wire snaking down, attaching here, supplying power over here. What is up with this resistor, this trimmer resistor, other parts bodged in down here? You can see where... it's speechless. Just fumble for words again. Now, next, these radios from the factory come with a FQP 13N10 driver and FQP 13N10s for both of the finals. What does that say? IRF 520. Yeah, for some reason, a lower power MOSFET was installed in place of what should be in here, which is a slightly higher power FQP 13N10. Why? Well, I know why they were probably replaced. Remember, we have smoke spots here, so I would have to assume that the originals probably went up in flames. But and they installed these, I guess, because they're cheaper, and they are. The IRF 520s, they almost give those things away, they're so cheap. So, yeah, I guess they just stuck them in because they don't cost as much. Man, I mean... So, let's just hook it up and take a look at this thing. It's not good. Anytime you open the covers on a radio and see... It's not just questionable, it's just outright, pardon my French, crap work. You know it's going to be horrible on air. And this radio is most definitely horrible on air. So, okay, radio's already on. We're on channel 20, AM. Get a microphone here. Now I'm going to turn the mic gain, like it's already down the whole way. So, we have the normal setup. Coax cable goes up to a bird directional coupler. The sample port on that goes to a splitter combiner to split the signal out to the oscilloscope and the spectrum analyzer. The watt meter is in line with this cable then, so we're reading wattage over there. We have the spectrum analyzer and scope hooked up. The spectrum analyzer is set to a center frequency of the channel we're on, 27.205, and I have the span set to look at 10 kilohertz worth of bandwidth. And if we key the microphone, I'm going to have the RF power knob. Now this is a key we're going to need to keep in mind here. This radio has, from the factory, an RF power knob. Okay, so you can turn your carrier up or down. Now, the customer was running this into an amplifier, so he had it turned down the whole way. But for some reason, yeah, it blew up his amplifier. Well, that's because, just because that's down doesn't mean the overall power coming out of this thing is down. So if we turn it up the whole way, and come on, let's move the boom up here a little bit, and we key the microphone, we can see we got what, like 13 watts. Back to peak here. We've got a peak marker now, it's continuous peak, so yeah, it's 41.45 dBm. So yeah, it's a little over 13 watts, and we can see there's our carrier up there. Now if I turn the RF power knob down, you can see the carrier decreased on the scope. You can see the power level in the spectrum analyzer has gone down to what, 35.6 dBm, and we're a little bit under 4 watts there, because 36 dBm is 4 watts. So yeah, we're a little bit below 4 watts, and we're a little bit below 36 dBm there. Now, nothing too bad there. Power could be turned down a little bit more for the low setting, but the big problem is, you guessed it, modulation. Because of course, where's all that work at in this radio? AM regulator right there. They've cut traces, bodged all his parts in, which had to do God knows what. So we're just going to take our microphone. I'm going to turn on an audio source so you can hear it here. It's just a 1000 hertz audio tone. We'll just hold the microphone there and see what it looks like. So I'm going to turn the RF power knob up the whole way. So if I turn the audio off, key the mic, see we're back at our 13 watts, okay, and I'll turn the audio on and turn the microphone gain up the whole way. Woohoo! Boy, doesn't that just look yummy. Rail cars, look how horrible that looks on the spectrum analyzer. Now here's where it gets really good. Turn that annoying tone off for a second. Now, the way these radios are designed to operate is, as you turn the RF power knob down, not only does the carrier decrease, but your modulation is going to stay in the same proportion to that carrier. So those, now granted that looked horrible, you had those rail cars, as I call them, just rectangular boxes, but you should have a nice sinusoidal waveform look to that, is what it should be. But that will decrease as well, because as you reduce the carrier, the peak power, all the power, everything should decrease evenly, you know, basically at the same exact rate. These radios do that really well, or they're supposed to. So, let's turn that annoying tone back on. Okay, that's with the RF power knob up the whole way, and now I'm going to turn it down the whole way. That's with it down the whole way. Notice the peak power didn't change at all. They got a little bit, the little modulation packages, you could say, got a little bit narrower. If I turn it back up, yeah, you can see they got a little fatter, but it didn't change the amplitude at all. Yeah, the carrier didn't increase, or decrease, like it should have. Or not the carrier, the modulation, or the swing, that a lot of people would call it. That's why he blew up his amplifier when he hooked his radio up to it. Normally, you'd have, you know, maximum carrier with your maximum peak-to-peak voltage measured at the antenna jack when you have the RF power up the whole way. But when you turn the carrier power down, your peak power should also decrease. The problem for this poor guy is, he turned the RF carrier power down the whole way. It's still doing the exact same amount of splatter out of the antenna. You know, the swing or peak power was still the same, because the radio's been butchered. So his amplifier, I think that he said it could take like 30 watts peak of drive, blew up when it saw like 45 watts peak of drive. Now, the next thing, if you look at the spectrum analyzer there, turn the audio back on there. Remember, I have the span, it's right there as a matter of fact, it says span 10 kilohertz, okay? You see all of that, how high up normally you're going to have. You're going to have your carrier your upper and lower sidebands, and you'll always have your harmonics over here. That's just normal, okay? Harmonics are just a fact of life. But they should not be anywhere close to this high. They should be down here. So if we change the span now, because remember, we're only looking at 1 channel's worth of spacing there. So if we change the span to 30 kilohertz, now we have 3 channels worth displayed on the screen. Key the microphone again. Yeah, it's splattering into the adjacent channels. And if we go to 50 kilohertz, which would be 5 channels wide, I don't want to key this thing for too long, or it's just going to blow out another set of finals. Yeah, pyramid. It should not be a pyramid. And if I turn the carrier down the whole way, that doesn't really change anything other than, yeah, the audio gets even, as if it's humanly possible, the audio gets even worse. Yeah, like I said, broken record. I must just be talking to myself. So, don't dust in your radio. That's probably the moral of the story here. Yeah, these radios sound just fine. Can they be improved a little bit? Yes. From the factory, any radio. They never do advertised modulation or power. I don't care who makes it. They're just always a little bit low. So you can usually get an alignment done. It'll increase your receive sensitivity, increase your power a little bit. But remember, power and modulation should be set to the maximum limit that the manufacturer specs in the service manual. If you start exceeding those levels that because you got to remember, you did not design this radio. The company that made the radio designed the radio. Or even the company, if they didn't make it themselves, it's a company that designed it and then relabels it for somebody else. But if you don't align your radios and you try to get every last ounce of power out of a radio, well, you'll do that. You'll get every last ounce of power out of it, and you'll also get the magic smoke. Don't let the magic smoke out of your radios. So, yeah, I told this guy, I was like, this here would be fairly easy probably to get off all this stuff here, because there's no components, I mean, other than what somebody added here. But cleaning this off probably wouldn't be too big of a problem. I could get that stuff off and reattach any cut circuit traces and do trace repairs there. The problem is on this side. Even down here, yeah, it'd be a little bit of work, but that shouldn't be, as long as not too many traces are cut down here, that shouldn't be too bad. The big problem, or what could be a possible problem area, would be this. All those little tiny 0402 size parts, 0402 and 0603 size surface mount parts that are all now encased in this goop down here. And I stand a chance of ripping them off the board, and if they get ripped off the board, of damaging the circuit traces, that could get really, really super expensive really fast, trying to fix a bunch of damaged circuit traces down here. So, yeah, I mean, now, what did they do? Like I say, I can't see the parts in here. I can't see the parts that are under here. I can only guess. But from what I'm seeing here, I kind of get the feeling it's been strikered. So what do I mean by it's been strikered? So this is a President Lincoln 2 Plus. The striker, what is that? SR 955, I think. Basically the same chassis, okay? Internals look pretty much the same, very close. They're not exactly the same though. There are some major differences. The big difference between the Striker SR 955 and this radio is, in this radio, the AM modulation that's controlled by the AM regulator over here, the finals are modulated, okay? The modulation transistor is attached, supplies modulation to the finals in this radio. The Strikers do not. The Strikers modulate the pre-driver and the driver transistor. The finals in a SR955 are from the factory volted, basically straight off of the end, or the power jack, just like this radio looks to be now. So I think that's what somebody tried to do, turn a president into a striker, and did an absolutely deplorable job at doing it. I mean, yeah, this stiff neck territory, man. You just shake your head all day. That's, people ask me, what do you do for a living? I get a stiff neck. You need to look at you like you're crazy. What do you mean you get a stiff neck? I just shake my head all day long. That's what I do. It's because of stuff like this. So, yeah, anytime, the big thing is when somebody sells you a radio, or you have a radio and they tell you they're going to do amazing things to your radio. Oh, I'm going to get all this power out. You're going to talk 3-4 times farther than you could before. Just remember, it may be able to do that in the short term, but you're going to let the magic smoke out eventually. And as you saw in the spectrum analyzer and the oscilloscope, it's going to be horrendously distorted. You know, and just out of curiosity, let's just hook this back up. Let's see what this thing has, because we didn't look at the second harmonic to see if it has a large second harmonic. Okay, so let's change the spectrum analyzer here, the center frequency. So we'll put the span back to 10 kilohertz. Okay, we'll take the frequency, where the radio's still on, 27205, so second harmonic will be 2 times that. So we need to take this to, what, 54.41 megahertz. And let's see, radio's on, and key the mic. And we have and I have this spectrum analyzer calibrated. I've got my calibration offset for all the cables, the attenuators, the sample port, everything adds up. From the time the signal leaves this jack to it comes in the front of the spectrum analyzer, the calibration factor is 53.8 dBm. So that reference offset has already been programmed in there, so any readings we take on the spectrum analyzer are going to be correct. So we have a second harmonic with a peak of just about minus 19 dBm, and you can see if I whistle into the microphone, yeah, you can see the modulation there as well. So let me just turn the mic gain down so we can get a good steady just second harmonic carrier. It's bouncing between 17 to 18 range. So we'll just be generous and say it's a little bit lower. It's just an even minus 17. And then we'll go back to our carrier frequency, 27.20, come on, 05 megahertz. Key the microphone again, and we have a peak of 41 point, I have a calculator here. We have a carrier of 41.36, and then we're going to add the initial, say, 17 that we had for the second harmonic. So it's 58.36 dB down. That's actually not bad. It should be 60, but I've seen a lot worse before. I've seen radios that had a second harmonic that was only like 40 dB down, or sometimes even worse than that. Yeah, we're 58, at least 58.36, because I was being generous with that second harmonic measurement. So yeah, I'm going to say that's not really that bad. It's not good. And actually, let's just to be safe, to make sure there's no other weird harmonics or distortion products there, let's just put the start frequency at, let's say, 10 megahertz. And the stop frequency at, we'll make it 200 megahertz. Key the microphone, yeah. So there you go. There's our fundamental frequency, and you can see, yeah. So spectrally, it's rather clean. And if I turn the mic gain back up and modulate, yeah. So it's not like they didn't screw with, luckily, the second harmonic trap, and any of this stuff that they did, luckily, isn't generating a lot of extra modulation or distortion products, other than the audio distortion. Yeah, that's just horrible. But man, so I told him, I was like, this could get extremely expensive really fast. You know, I'm going to try, basically we came to the conclusion that I'm going to try to align this best possible. The receive sensitivity is also not that fantastic on this. Factory spec for these is 20 dB SINAD at minus 111 dBm in AM. Yet President picked a weird, that's not your normal, you know, pretty much industry standard measurement spec. Your standardized spec would be your 12 dB SINAD point. 20 dB SINAD, that's actually a lot better, because remember, SINAD measurements, the larger the number, the better. That's one of the things where bigger numbers are better. So the higher your dB SINAD is, the better the sensitivity is. They spec it at minus 111 dBm, 20 dB SINAD. This radio currently, when I put the signal generator on minus 110, is right at 12 dB SINAD. So yeah, it's obviously not that, it's not that fantastic. So I'll do a full alignment on it. You know, make sure frequency calibration is good, the receive circuit, and the transmit at least to here, at least, well, to the driver. Everything should be fine up to the driver. After that, honestly, it's just going to be what it is. I'll see if I can get these trimmers out of this goop. Hopefully I can get that trimmer, if maybe worst case scenario, I'll just cut this chunk out here. If I have to put a new trimmer resistor in, that's no biggie. I've got surface mount trimmer resistors, and see if I can get, I don't even know what that's supposed to do, but yeah, I'll try and see if I can get that broken loose so that'll turn, because like I say, right now it's just the entire sides of it, it's just encased in that black snot. Moral of the story, people, save your money. And don't just save your money today, save yourself lots of smoke money in the future. That's the other problem with this kind of work. You pay for the radio, you pay for all this work, and then month, year and a half down the road, radio blows up on you. You send it back, it gets fixed. Radio lasts you another however much longer, and it blows up again. And you send it back and keep getting it fixed. Eventually to the point where the circuit board gets damaged because parts have been installed and removed so many times, your radio just becomes a paperweight and it's trash. Where if you had just left it alone, where it actually sounded better, and you could probably, most likely, it's what a lot of people, they are surprised. A lot of times I'll do a radio for somebody, they get the radio back, it's doing less power, sometimes significantly less power than the radio was doing when they sent it to me, but they can talk farther, and they get compliments on how it sounds. And they're like, well, how's that possible? It's doing less power. No, actually, on channel, it's doing, a lot of times, more power. Remember when you looked at that spectrum analyzer, something like that watt meter over there, and that's where this is a smoke and mirrors thing. People do modifications, it looks great on a watt meter, especially if you're using a peak reading watt meter. Oh man, you'll have that needle just hammering the right side of the scale. The problem is, all of that newfound needle bending power isn't on channel. So like when we were looking at the spectrum analyzer, you want it in channel. You don't want that power out on the adjacent channels. That power out on the adjacent channels is also being read by the watt meter. It's a dumb meter. It just measures everything that goes into it. All, unless it is a very expensive frequency selective watt meter, which is going to cost you probably 15 grand or more for a good one, which is a laboratory instrument. It's something you're never going to see on any tech's bench, is a high power frequency selective watt meter. It's just not used. Like I say, that's laboratory style equipment. But regular watt meters, they're dumb. The reason I say they're dumb is they don't measure frequency or measure power at a specific frequency. They measure all of the RF power that's going into it. They don't care where it's at in the RF spectrum. If it goes in there, it makes the needle go up. That's where when you look at it on the spectrum analyzer, you can see exactly where your power's at. Is your power on channel, or is it in the adjacent channels? Or if it's, if someone's been tinkering with, let's say, the second harmonic trap, 54 megahertz trap circuit, that's where you'll see high power out at the second harmonic. Well, that second harmonic power is also going to show up on a watt meter. It may look good there, but it's not doing you any good because the power is not on the channel that you're actually talking on. So let me see what I can get out of this thing. The receive will be better, there's no doubt in my mind. I'll get the receive better, but yeah, as far as transmit goes, he'd just be better off buying another radio. He's already got some of these. Yeah, I guess he bought this one off his friend, just felt sorry for him. Thought he'd send it to me and see if there was anything I could do for it. And is there? Yeah, I could probably undo all this stuff, but it's just, like I say, this down here, you could get into scary financial territory depending how hard that goop would all be to get out of there. And if you start damaging stuff, that's when the bill starts going ka-ching, 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 and we don't want to have to do that to somebody. So yeah, I'll get this as best as I can. If I can get the modulation to where it's at least not as horrible looking and sounding as it is, anything's an improvement over what we got right now. You couldn't make this sound any worse. Okay, so I think being the key word, that I have all of the unwanted stuff removed from the radio now. So the glue, yeah, I took this flappy cap out. This diode, I gotta solder the power wires back on. I don't know why they put these huge reverse protection diodes in here. They already have large reverse protection diodes in here. There's one thing President's good at: reverse protection. You don't need to go doing this kind of stuff in a modern Presidents. They're just fine the way they are. Took out the two finals that were incorrect. Now I have called the customer since the last piece. He said yes, apparently it, I guess, did let smoke out. The original owner of this told the current owner when he bought it off of them, like I say, they're friends. Yeah, because he wasn't happy. He was apparently talking on the radio to them, and just kind of disappeared. Yeah, he wasn't happy when smoke started coming out of the back of this thing. But yeah, it's been back to the shop twice, so that right there should be an indicator. Whatever was done to the radio, it just ain't right. If it's making parts just go out in short order, yeah, something's definitely not right. So here's the glue. Like I say, fortunately, man, this stuff just kind of popped out. You can see all the little impressions from all the parts. And that one's on the floor now, but yeah, it's still kind of rubbery. You just kind of really slowly pull it, then it just slowly starts to kind of delaminate off the board and eventually just popped off. On the bottom side here, I've got that all cleaned up now. There is a little bit of delamination of some of these circuit traces. Some of these pads for the finals have started to delaminate off the board. So yeah, I guess the previous soldering that was done on this, they must have had their tip temperature, either their tip temperature turned up too high, or they weren't using a proper soldering station with a adjustable temperature, and they just nuked the board, because these are actually really good high quality fiberglass circuit boards. It's not like your old radios that had old phenolic boards where the circuit traces were really easy to damage. These, it's actually kind of hard because they're fiberglass boards. So when you see trace delamination, you're pretty much guaranteed the board got cooked by using the wrong kind of soldering iron. I do have, a cut trace to repair there and there where it had been cut. The parts, I wasn't sure because I couldn't tell because of the blob of glue what the heck was in there. This is actually what was tacked on the backside here. Two Mylar caps, so those are gone. Took that, I guess it was this one, this trimmer resistor, and I think it was that surface mount diode were tacked in over here, cleaned all of that up. Over here in this section we had the other trimmer resistor with this resistor, this other large diode. There was a couple caps that I pulled out just because they were kind of in the way when I was cleaning up down there, so I'll stick all new parts down in there. But yeah, let me just set it down, move the camera down instead of waving the radio around. I am going to have to do a little bit of, and I have to actually look to see exactly what the heck's supposed to go in here, but there's a pad that's missing right there. There's a little bit of something missing there. You can see this had all been scraped off the ground plane here. That's fine, I just tinned that. Yeah, everything looks pretty good there. I don't think there was anything here I need to, again, check. I removed that coil that was here with all the wire, cleaned up all of that. So yeah, it looks pretty good. Like I said, I may have to do a little bit of repair here. I just need to pull the schematic and take a look. Actually, I'll just pull out another radio. And honestly, when you're doing stuff like this, that's usually the easiest way to get your radio back to factory condition, is just pull another radio. That's why I have, one of the main reasons I have so many radios. When you get something like this where there's a lot of parts, you just need to see if the right parts are in there, or where what goes. Sure, you can look it up on the schematic and look at it on the board layout diagram. Nothing beats just being able to set a good working factory bone stock radio beside your project and just look at it and go, ah, okay, yeah, there's a trace missing here, this part goes from here to here. It's just so much easier to have another radio to look at. I will take the screws out for the pre-driver and the driver with all the cleaning fluid I've had flushed, because I've actually soldered and had a bunch of flux down in here, cleaned the pads up, soldered again, and clean up. I've had a lot of cleaning solvents go through here, so there's not much heatsink compound left on either of these transistors. So I'll just pop the screws out, clean them up, and apply some fresh heatsink compound. But yeah, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, it's a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but a lot of work, but the radio will work the way it was designed to work. Good. Yeah, well, and he wants me to do the modification to the audio bandpass filter in this. It's a little modification I do, and that's the only modification I recommend on these radios. And it's not for everybody. If you're happy with the way your radio sounds, don't even get that done. That's a waste of money for you. If you like the way you sound coming out of one of these, stick with it. Don't do anything that's going to change that. Now, if you're not happy with the frequency response, because in a lot of people's opinions, these do have a fairly narrow audio passband. I actually did a video on that showing that. They do have a fairly narrow. Ran a sweep signal generator audio through this and showed how it's fairly narrow and drops off really fast. I do a little modification to the mic band pass filter in this thing, the low pass filter, that just slightly widens it up. We're not talking hi-fi, because there is, remember, no such thing as hi-fi AM monaural radio. It's an AM for starters. It's monaural. It's only one. It's not like you have stereo. There is no high fidelity to this. No matter what you do to this thing, it's never going to be hi-fi. But yeah, it is definitely a little bit pinched, so I'll do that. That's just changing out a couple of the caps around that op amp on the low pass filter, and yeah, put the new pair of proper finals in this. Like I say, took out these IRF 520s, which are the wrong ones. And what brand are these? Yeah, at least they were name brand. They weren't no names. And stick the rest of the missing parts in here that had been pulled out by the when this modification was done, and it should be a good working radio then. Back the way it was basically when it left the factory, with some minor improvements. Just minor, that's all they need. A proper alignment, man, does wonders for these radios. So let me get to it. Okay, so it lives to fight another day. And should last a long time now. Shouldn't be going back to the shop every week or so to have new finals installed in it. Everything was removed. There were a couple circuit traces that were just removed off of the board so they could do this shit. Luckily, they were close enough. There were really small pieces or small pads that were removed, so I was actually able to, in one case, just go from like an 0402 size, I think it was 0402, resistor to I think an 0805 resistor, which of course is a little bit bigger, which was able to jump the gap to get to the final bias adjustment. So yeah, just kind of repositioning a few of those little tiny parts, I was able to get everything connected without actually having to take, because that is very time consuming. Replacing little tiny traces, it does take a lot of time. Over here, I really didn't have to do much other than remove, I think it was what, that trimmer resistor and that one surface mount diode there. Took that off. That's really all that was over there. Most of the work was over here or on the back side here. So all of this has been straightened up. The cut traces were bridged back across. Of course, a new set of proper finals were installed in this. So it has what it's supposed to have. F13N10s. We get zoomed in here. Can we see them? Yeah. So you can see we have FQP 13N10s like we're supposed to again. And then there's the... Yeah, and there was just a lot of the solder mask had been removed in there, so that's why there's a lot more silver down in here than you'd normally see, because like I said, it had all been scratched off to use for a ground plane for its stupid modification. So all of the missing parts, these two resistors, this diode, the trimmer resistor, this capacitor, this resistor, and that resistor were all missing. That one was still there, and I think that one may have been. I'm not 100% sure. I almost have to go watch my own video back to the beginning. But yeah, I know that one was still there. That one may have been, but yeah, all these other parts that were missing, they've all been replaced. These empty holes here are supposed to be empty. There's not supposed to be anything there. Had removed the wire, cleaned all that big huge globs of solder off there. Like I say, really wasn't anything over here. They just had that diode and trimmer resistor installed. While I was at it, like I say, I had a lot of cleaners down in here because I had to clean this out a couple times, so most of the heatsink compound was gone off of these two. So I pulled both of these, just folded them out, put some fresh in there. Same thing with the AM regulator. I just went ahead and took the screw out, pulled it out, put some fresh heatsink compound in on that. So I haven't done the actual alignment on it yet. I just really quick went through just to verify that it works. Was able to set the AM power level right, so it's 12 watts AM with the RF power turned up the whole way, and then I can get it down to about 2.5 watts on low. Modulation adjusts just fine, so it looks like that's pretty much, and it didn't look like there was anything else done to it. So removing all that junk, put it back to the way it's supposed to be. So now I can do my modification on the low pass filter, just increase the bandwidth on that about 2 kilohertz. Because yeah, these things are just, they're tight. they're only like 2 kilohertz wide, the audio pass band, before it seriously starts to taper off. So like I say, it's the modification I do there, just changing a few values, increases it by about 2,000 more hertz of flat frequency response before it starts to taper off. And then by the time you get to your channel band edge, it's down at limits where it should be. So I got to desolder all these, take all the can lids off. That's the only thing I hate about all of these radios. The Presidents, the Strikers, pretty much all these companies, they've been using RF shielding cans for decades. It's not like this is a new thing. I have never seen one of these fall off of a radio before. Why must they solder these things on? And this is done at the factory. There's a blob of solder there, there's one down here, there's one here, there's one here. Yeah, of course, what's inside these cans? Adjustments. So yeah, and that can be a pain in the butt. You have to be careful, and this is just a word of caution for people. If you ever do an alignment, I suggest coming in, if you have a desoldering iron, even then though, it's hard to get into some of these places. You almost have to use desoldering braid, which is what I usually use. I'll just come in with a really wide piece of desoldering braid, and where's my big fat tip? I'll use like this tip here, the really fat one. Get as much of that solder off as I can, then just come in with a screwdriver, you don't need a lot of pressure, but then set your soldering iron back on there and just gently wiggle this until it pops up. If you leave all this solder, and I speak from experience here, if you leave all the solder on here and you again stick your soldering iron on there and you pry this can lid up, when it pops loose, all that solder there just goes all over the circuit board. Yeah, so now you've got to clean little blobs of solder off. You can end up all over the circuit board. So yeah, try and get most of that off. Like I say, there's a big glob right there. Right there. There's one here, here, and right there. So yeah, just try and get most of that off before you go popping the can lids off. And they may have done it for shielding. I mean, to make sure there was a really good electrical connection from the can lid to the base, but honestly, as tight as these things fit, they don't need to solder them. Like I say, for decades, they've never soldered can lids on. It is what it is. Just like I say, word of caution, watch the socket. You just end up with a mess of little solder blob shorts all over your circuit board. So let me get those off, do the alignment. Well, actually, I got to do the modification here real first, change out those little ceramic caps, and then do the alignment, and it'll be ready to go, and he shouldn't have any problems. Yeah, maybe he can sell it back to the guy that originally bought it, and I put all this, normally I'd just throw this in the trash can, but yeah, I'm going to send this back to him so he can have what caused all these problems. Well, the capacitor didn't cause any problems, but yeah, all this other stuff, just that's why apparently it's been eating finals, and God, I just, the audio just so distorted. How you would think the first person that ever got one of these radios that had that done would have just flipped when they heard, or when other people heard them and told them how horrible they sounded. Yet people continue to get stuff like this, and that's why this stuff gets done. One person gets it done, and then, oh, well, I got to get that done too, and it spreads, and yeah, I mean, if someone had put the kibosh on this, the first radio that went out and said, man, that is definitely something you don't want to get done, and put the word out, yeah, then you wouldn't see shit like this getting done. But I do my best to try and tell people, so word to the wise. Okay, so I've got this radio pretty much done now, other than putting the covers back on it. Boy, what a nightmare. So, the moral to the story, anybody tells you they want to do some crazy stuff like what's in this bag here to your radio, just say thanks, but no thanks. That's probably the best thing I can say. So, luckily it was removable. Wasn't serious damage to the circuit board. Like I say, there were a few traces. I don't know if maybe either the parts originally in the radio had been ripped out, or the parts that were removed had been desoldered, and then the traces removed, to remove connection so they could do this hocus pocus to it. But yeah, it just, don't do it. Like I say, probably the biggest giveaway is, why would the finals originally have burned up and had to have been replaced? It's a almost new radio. It's not like from the factory they're just going to go kapoof. The only other thing that's going to make them do that is adjusting your power up too high. Again, more hocus pocus, smoke and mirrors. Yeah, you get a little bit more power for a short amount of time until you let that expensive magic smoke out. So, yeah, just head shaking still. Every time I look over at this, and I usually just, all this stuff would just go in a trash can when I remove modifications. But yeah, I'm going to ship this back to the customer with the radio, so he can then give this bag, I guess, it'd be his choice. But yeah, what he should do is give this bag back to the guy that originally bought this radio, and then that guy can take this bag back to the people that he bought it from. So, yeah, and say, here, thanks, but no thanks, you can have your crap back. I sold the radio, gave it to a guy, and he had all of this removed, and it's put back to stock factory the way it's supposed to be. So, man, that's pretty much it. Like I say, I initially thought it was going to be a nightmare, but thank God this is rubbery type glue that came out. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you happen to have one that has had this done to it, and you keep experiencing finals going out in it, it can be undone. It's just a matter of pulling the glue off, basically taking all of the parts out that were added, Make sure you have the correct finals in it, you know, the 13N10s, because if you put the IRF 520s in them, that's actually a lower power transistor. Not horribly lower, it's just a little bit lower in power, output power though. You know, the radios would work fine with the IRF 520s, but it's supposed to have 13N10s, so that's what should be in it. And then you put back in basically any missing parts. Now when you get back here to the biasing circuit for the finals, if pads are missing, you know, basically exactly the same as they were in this one, you don't actually have to replace the traces, because literally the pieces of traces that were missing were like maybe that big. You can't even barely see that little corner of the bag that I'm, you know, exposing right there. You know, just tiny little pieces of circuit traces. You'll be able to move, I'm sure. Yeah, it looks good in a viewfinder, so I'm sure on a big computer screen it'd be really visible. But there was a trace missing right here. This trace missing doesn't matter, because there's actually a pad that goes here, but this side of this trimmer resistor is not attached to anything. So that pad, initially the factory would have put it there just as an attachment point. So it was attached on all three corners. But it missing, it's not going to hurt anything. As small as these trimmers are, they're like weigh probably as much as a grain of rice. So it being attached in both corners is fine. But what I ended up doing was actually sliding this trimmer resistor, because the pad that connects between this capacitor and this trimmer resistor, there's supposed to be a circuit trace right there. That was gone, so I just pushed the trimmer resistor back a little bit. There was still enough pad here to be able to solder it to the resistor, to the trimmer. And then on this side you can see I kind of got this capacitor cocked sideways a little bit to move it a little closer to the wiper contact point on the other side, and then just was able to solder that basically directly there. And then the pad was still here, you know, where it connects then to this resistor, so that was all good. And yeah, all this exposed area here, I just re-tinned that with some solder, because that was just exposed copper where they had scraped off the solder mask, you know, I guess for ground points where they had all the parts bodged in there. But yeah, so it's not too bad. It's small work, you know, just be advised. And actually this isn't too bad. These parts are all, in the grand scheme of things when it comes to surface mount parts, this resistor, diode, these two resistors, and this cap, and this trimmer resistor, they're large, generally speaking, for surface mount parts. The only part you may struggle with if you have a hard time with surface mount parts is this little tiny capacitor right here. That one was also missing. But yeah, if you're going to tackle this, just make sure you have a little bit of experience playing around with, you know, doing surface mount type work. You know, remove all the huge globs of solder like I did here. You basically put this all back to so it looks like factory stock. We don't need huge globs of solder connecting all of this stuff. It's the circuit trace that's there works just fine, just as the factory designed it. We don't need a huge, you know, 1/8 inch thick glob of solder shorting across there to do it. Same thing on the back. You know, you don't need, again, massive thick piles of solder on here. You know, just the way the factory designed it, just a lightly tinned circuit trace across here is just fine. You don't need to pile the solder up that high. It's not like there's 500 amps going through that circuit trace. I even cleaned up a lot of these other ones here. You can see they're shiny now instead of the dull finish that they originally were. They had huge globs of solder on all of this, all of these inductor, the main coils on the other side there, they had huge globs of solder. Again, here there was, you know, some hodgepodgery going on. I don't know why they even cut out around here. This is isolated from the factory. Why? What are all these scratch marks? Unless they had a solder bridge, maybe they scraped it off. I don't know. You know, I think that, yeah, there was a part, the caps, one of those poly caps right there was attached. I think it was from like there to here. So they had scraped that off for a solder trace. Again, I just re-tinned it. The trace where it was cut right here and here, that's been repaired. There's a jumper across there now that reattaches all of that. One thing I did do was put a tiny little dot, because this pad and this pad, and if you have a radio that this has been done to, may or may not be like this, but on this radio, this pad and this pad had been lifted. Now they were still attached to the circuit, because you can see these little holes right there. Those are the vias where this pin actually attaches through those vias then to the other side of the circuit board, where they're actually attached into the circuit. So those were still attached fine. It's just the pad that where the MOSFET, this leg actually solders down, was loose. So I did put a little tiny dot of epoxy underneath of those to reattach those back down, but I didn't have to actually fix the traces themselves. The pads were still fine. They'd just become unlaminated off of the board. So there you go. If you got yourself a hacked President Lincoln 2 or 2 Plus, I guess, it can be undone. All hope is not lost. Okay, so when I figure I'd tack on a little piece on the end of this video. Occasionally people will say, Mike, I like it when you just scan through the channels and can actually hear what radios sound like. And of course, when I had the radio on last time, there was absolutely no skip. It was just completely dead. I was just getting ready to put this in the box, and I figured, I'll hook it back up and just see if there's anything coming in. Well, there's not anything coming in. It's just coming in on every channel. Man, we're just overloaded with skip at the moment. So yeah, it doesn't take much time for skip to come in and go away. But so let's do a little bit of listening for those people that like that.
Tell them cotton pickers down south, the yellow light's on.
I'm not sure how high up I need to turn the volume so you can hear it in the camera, but
better talk fast.
this will probably be all right.
Oh, I know you ain't talking about me. You're somebody stupid bitch. You must be talking. And that's my 248 New Jersey Raj. Take care, 248. You got that stick down. I'm gone. No bogus fives. No bogus fives. Derailed 10-7.
I said, what's up? Freddie, Mo Freddie, that long-nosed Suburban around Connecticut, 225 in the woods, right?
X-Force gets... South Carolina, I guarantee you. Big triple fours is waving at you. Yeah, affordable. Hello, Buckeye State. Hello, my friend up here in Buckeye State. Thomas Eaton to you. All my friends up here in Buckeye, up here. I'm getting some bleed over as well. Somebody frequent. They're kind of bleeding in on the one, David, top of the afternoon, 106, Wichita, standing by. Almost getting to be. David, almost.
Well, I'm trying to get the channel 6. I forgot. Export radio. It just continues to keep tuning up. So let's actually start down at... Well, actually, let's see if there's anything going on below, in the 40 below. Because if the South's coming in, Mexico might be coming in. And I know some people do talk down here. Yeah, there's somebody on 26885.
Down the big road out here. You know, wild man waving. Well, that ain't so much. Okay, if I'm wild, you're a wild man, North Carolina Blue Ridge waving out back.
I can hear channel 6 bleeding in. Whoever it was just unkeyed. I heard him at like 38, 36935. I could start to hear him bleeding in. can handle of that.
Cornfields, dead wire. Country boy in the cornfields, dead wire out around Arkansas. Break.
Yeah, right back, 186. 186 New Jersey, 500. Right back.
A big old smile up out here in the black gold. What's going on, dead short? What's going on, dead short? Hey, dead short, old dead wire. How much it cost?
One guy's off high, one guy's off a little bit low. Let's try above channel 40 and see if there's anything happening up here. There was somebody there for a second. Come on.
Yeah, I've got some more in my toolbox there, I would say.
Enjoy it up here, man. Tell the rest of the gang you said hello. We won't get out of here. We'll catch above Eastern Tennessee. We're standing by. Please try to follow the radio. About 99 Cleveland. 747 Tennessee. Down here about 20 over. 871-360 North Carolina. We'll catch you later.
Sounds like North and South Carolina are booming in.
The undisputed independent heavyweight champs up in there, 225 right back.
Tennessee, 457 week lap.
So that's with the high cut on. find a dead channel here. There's high cut on, high cut off, and then A&L noise blanker off, noise blanker, which isn't going to do anything because that's for impulse noise, and then A&L. Okay, my brain's starting to rot. Can't stay on any of those channels for more than a couple seconds.
Lane 23 on the mall. Tell that cat make a big hammer key up. Radio ain't got no separator on it, so hey, y'all just stick around a while and we'll see if we can make a trip. 034 Tennessee, standing by.
The Channel 6 people are starting to infest the entire band. No, actually, I don't know who. There's just so many big stations coming in.
Go ahead and hit him up. But he might not give you any commission on 434 if he got his chores done early there, Break.
It was like 20, 30 over. There was like 3 or 4 of them all on at the same time.
On my way. Here's 3-4 calling road dogs out there, man. With this one right behind, I noticed that Mother Nature sure is busy tonight. Looks like she's open for business right about now, man.
Low 10. I heard that. She said you might cash it in next week. And the big boss owes you a commission check. Well, he's talking to somebody else, man, so he's got conditions elsewhere, but he did ease up in there. He's getting stronger in my receive, so I believe he's at his home 20. I don't believe he's been doing chores at Daddy's house. I believe he's at his Ponderosa there, Break.
Okay, so there you go. Like I say, I just thought I'd fire this back up because people often say, Mike, you never scan around the channel so we can actually hear what the radios sound like. So there you go. You got a little bit of listening in on this resurrected and de-stupefied Lincoln 2 Plus.